Welcome back to Energy, Connection, and Courage at Work. I'm Rebecca Johnson.
And I'm Natalie Johnson.
If you joined us for the first episode, you already know a little bit about Natalie and me, including that she's a forklift driver and I'm a compulsive counter cleaner. If you want more on that, you can go back and listen to episode 1, but you don't have to in order to enjoy this one. So today we're going to start our first official conversation around the idea of energy, and we're going to dig in today on the topic of spiritual energy, which we think about through the lens of purpose. Now, when our team was talking about what we might do with this episode, there was actually some internal debate about whether or not we should talk first about spiritual energy. Some people on the team felt like, oh, that's kind of woo woo and we're going to lose some listeners. I was a little bit on the fence about it, not sure where to start. But Nat, you really felt strongly that we needed to start our conversation on energy by talking about spiritual energy or purpose. And I personally know why you feel that way, but I thought it would be good for you to explain to our listeners why we're starting with purpose. And the best way that I've ever heard you talk about that is that light bulb moment that you had around purpose years ago. Will you share that with us?
Yes, sure. So I'm realizing right now it was about 15 years ago because my son was a newborn and he is turning 16 next week. So it was about 15 years ago. I have two sons. I had a 3-year-old and a newborn. And it was just a really, really busy time in my life. My husband had just decided he was going to change his occupation. So he had a full time job, but then was going back to school in the evening. And so he was working full time all day and then going back to school from 6 p.m. until midnight, Monday through Saturday. So I really didn't see my husband. I had a full time job. I had 2 young kids. And during that time, I also decided, wow, it might be a good idea to purchase a fitness franchise on the side and, have a little side gig. And so, not a great idea to do that, but I did it anyway. So I was managing a side fitness franchise. I had a full time job, a newborn, a toddler, and a husband who couldn't help out because he was back at school. So it was really like just wake up and go every day. During that time, I also get a call from a company that invited me to come and audition to be one of their coaches facilitating their content. And when I researched what the content was exercise physiology, performance nutrition, and performance psychology, which is everything I've ever done in my career. So as soon as I read it, I think, sure, I could do this in my sleep. Of course, yes, I'll come and audition. But then there was a logistical problem because I had to drive and go out of town to do it and get a hotel. And so it required who's going to watch my kids, like all this organizing of stuff that was very stressful. And they said, before you can audition, before you come over to audition, we need you to be a participant in the class first. And by the way, the class is 3 days long. So I was irritated and annoyed. I thought, that's a lot of time away. That's a lot of organizing on my end with family and work. And, don't they know who I am? Like, don't they know that this is what I've done for the last 20 years? I could teach this class in my sleep. This doesn't look hard. So I was irritated by it, but I ultimately did it anyway because I just said yes to everything and I made it happen. But when I showed up for the class, I was annoyed and I was just trying to check the box of, yes, I participated. So I sat in the back of the room on purpose. I was on my phone, I was on my email, and I was not really engaging in the class. And so by day 2, and there were 3 different facilitators teaching this class, by day 2, one of the facilitators noticed what was happening with me. So she started doing things like walking back towards where I was in the back of the room. And she would stand right next to me when she was talking. So it would make it really uncomfortable for me to be on my phone. So I'd have to pay attention. And at some point in the class, we had just done an activity called Best Self Vision, where we had created a vision of us at our ideal best self. Describe it. What does it look like? And she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, who or what in your life deserves best self from you? And are they getting it? And in that moment, I heard her loud and clear. And it was this moment of, holy crap, what am I doing? Why am I choosing to be so busy in my life that I'm actually not showing up as this best self for really anyone? And who are the people and things that really matter to me? My kids, my family, my husband, are they getting the best of me? And in that moment, I realized they were not. And so it was this light bulb moment for me that something needed to change. And it was really emotional because once we started talking about best self, we talked about how, best self is a behavioral manifestation of purpose. When you show up as best self, that's you living with purpose. And there was this concept of purpose that I'd never thought about ever. What is my why? Why do I choose to show up in life the way that I do? And why in the world do I say yes to all these things and just continue checking the box this way and not showing up for my kids and my family? So it was a moment for me where I was, in some ways, forced to reflect on how I was living and if my energy was really being invested in what matters to me, and realizing that it wasn't and that something had to change. And so it was in that moment that was the beginning of the journey for me in really digging into what my purpose is, how I am showing up, how I want to show up, and how I want to be seen, especially by my kids and my family in my life. And it started the process of changing things. And where the biggest change was is I really needed to align my energy investments with what was most important to me.
There's so many things that come up for me in that. And one of them is that we are going to talk a lot about energy in this series, physical, mental, emotional, but that when you identify purpose, it serves as the North Star for figuring out where to invest your energy and how to develop a certain quality of energy. And the analogy that I always think of is like a sailboat. So if you take a sailboat and you put it in the water on a really windy day with its sails up, it has plenty of energy. It goes everywhere, left and right and zigzags. But if it doesn't have a rudder, none of that energy is steered in any particular direction. And so I always think about purpose being like the rudder on our sailboat. And for you, in terms of energy, one of the things I've noticed is that you don't often have a lack of energy, right? So it's not that you don't have enough energy. Whereas for me, that's the problem. I sometimes feel like I don't have enough energy to meet the demand. For you, it's more like you've got tons of energy, but identifying purpose helped you direct it in the right places and also helped you improve the quality of it.
Yeah, I love that sailboat analogy, in that it's exactly what you described it perfectly, because there's this fine line for me between, because energy is not a problem. It's not. I can have lots of energy. I can bring lots of energy. Energy is not the problem. It's focused energy
Mhm,
that is harder, because it's a fine line between having lots of energy and being focused and directed in the way I want to be,
mhm.
or having lots of energy and wasting it all over the place.
It's almost like this cycle, I'm imagining this too, is that when you are real connected with your purpose, it helps you direct your energy in a way that gets you aligned with your purpose. So being connected with your purpose helps you make decisions that mean you get to the end of your life and you think, not just, wow, I was really busy and productive, but like that busyness and productivity was directed in a way that makes me feel like I lived my life well. Its
Yeah.
purpose is like the beginning point and the end point.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, I can imagine how we've talked a little bit about this, but like what it meant is that you got a lot more present at home. And I'm also curious, since this is a show about the workplace, what did that light bulb moment around purpose mean for you at work? What happened once you really got connected with what's most important to you at work?
So the first thing that happened is I realized very quickly that this fitness franchise that I had invested in was not important to me, and that I needed to let go of all the energy being put into that. So I sold that. And then I started recognizing this habit that I had of saying yes to everything. And so I had to start creating some boundaries around what I say. And it wasn't just yes or no, it was what I say yes to, what I say maybe to, and
Mm-hmm.
what I say absolutely not to.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely no. And then the other part that came into play, there was a big highlight around my sleep deprivation. And so I had to start putting more time and energy into protecting my sleep.
And knowing you the way I do, I've never asked you this question before, so I don't have any idea what your answer is going to be. But I am imagining that selling the franchise and saying no to opportunities and getting more sleep in some way required courage from you. Like it required that you make some courageous choices. And we talk about courageous choices being choices you make because they're right, but oftentimes it means you have to face some fear or anxiety in making that choice. So tell me a little bit about how courage was involved in you ultimately making those choices to prioritize sleep and sell a franchise.
I think the franchise part, maybe required a little bit of courage because I had invested already so much time and energy into it that I was afraid to let it go, but
Hmm.
recognize the benefit. I think the courageous part was I had to have a conversation with my boss during that time and admit there's parts of my job that are not energizing me. I'm bored
Hmm.
and I'd like to change my job. I'd like to change my role. I'd like to change my responsibilities. And there's a little bit of fear around that he could have said, well, who do you think you are? Or, if you're
Hmm.
not liking this job, why are you in it? So I had to have that hard conversation with him. And then I also had to recognize that a lot of the work that I was doing late at night that was keeping me up late at night, that I would start at 10:30 or 11 at night and sometimes be up until 1 o'clock. It was this message of I need to get it done because I need to respond to clients, to people now, get it done. Be the first one to respond. Look busy and productive.
Hmm.
And I had to
Hmm.
let go of that. And so sometimes that meant people got used to me responding very quickly. And then all of a sudden I
Yeah.
wasn't. So I had to be okay with that. I had to be okay with them questioning that. I
Hmm.
had to start saying things like, I've just realized it's not good for me to be up until 1 o'clock in the morning doing work. And I had to start doing things like, I'm not going to work when I'm with my kids on Sundays and
Hmm.
I'm gonna stay off of my computer. And so I think it was a fear of around how people would perceive me if I changed.
Yep, which ultimately, I think in the work that we do with people, we realize is at the heart of a lot of issues is people being afraid that if they do something different around energy, if they practice self-care, if they say no, if they enact a new boundary, that the fear is often that bad things will happen. People will perceive me in a way I don't want to be perceived. I might miss out on opportunities. And so for me, the lesson here is that in our lives, we constantly have to make choices to renew our energy to make sure that it's directed and focused in the right way. We constantly have to make choices that keep us connected with the things that matter most. And those choices almost always require courage because they almost always require facing fear. And maybe to circle it back to purpose, all that work that I just described is very hard work. And we're really only going to do the hard work if we have a very powerful motivator for change. And one of the things, I think you were the first one ever to say this to me out loud, and I loved it, is that purpose is the most important powerful motivator for change. So if we're not really sure what our purpose is or we don't feel connected to it, we're simply not going to make the hard choices around energy and connection that are necessary.
Yep, absolutely. It's the force behind your behaviors. And so
Yes.
even when you're physically and mentally exhausted, if you have a strong purpose, it can still carry you through.
So I think that brings us to our one big thing because we're really, as we're going to be in the habit of doing in this podcast, we want to leave you all with one big thing, a simple thing that you can do right when you're done listening. And this one is around purpose. So, Nat, what do you think our listeners' one big thing for today should be?
So one big thing would be for people to think about their own best self vision and pull out the top 3 descriptive words that stand out. And so when you think about you showing up as the best version of yourself, how do you lead in life, whether you're in a formal leadership role or not? How do you communicate? How do you show up as a parent? How do you show up as a friend? When you're describing that person, you as your best self, what are the top 3 words that stand out? And then
Mm,
if you are interested, what we have in our show notes is that there is a worksheet that can help you go a little bit deeper on that if you want to go deeper. And then we're also providing a video of me talking people through the process of best self vision and thinking about what does best self vision look like and who and what in your life deserves it. So there's a
mhm.
little bit more supplemental activities if you want to go deeper.
Yeah, love it. Okay. In episode 1, we offered listeners a silly little secret about ourselves. Should we do that today? You
Yeah.
choose.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you go first.
Okay. So my silly little thing is that I not only can I drive a forklift, but I can play the tuba. So I played the tuba in middle school and junior high. That was my instrument of choice. And
Mhm.
I honestly believe if you handed me a tuba today, I could still play it.
I love it. That is the last instrument I would have chosen for you. Like, if you said, "Imagine me," but I would have chosen, like, the flute or something. But you with the tuba is just such a great visual. Okay, well, I'm gonna work on musical instruments then. So my secret is that I played piano. I took lessons from my mom until I was like 9 or 10. She's an amazing piano player. And then regrettably, I quit lessons and she wasn't enough of a disciplinarian to keep me on it. So I stopped playing piano for many years. And then when I was 22, I decided I wanted to get good at piano again. So I hired this woman. She was from Russia. She was my age. And she helped me work on this very complicated Mozart piece. And I was so proud of it. And I worked on it for months. And she invited me to this piano concert. She said, "I'm hosting a recital for all my piano students, and I'd love for you to come play your Mozart piece." And so I was like, "Oh my God, that's nerve wracking, but I'm going to do it." And so I expected to walk in to a piano concert with like a bunch of other adults. But actually, I didn't know this. All of her students except me were like elementary school students. So I walk into this recital and it's me and like 10 other 5, 6, 8, 10, 12-year-olds and all of their parents in the audience. And I was just mortified. So I just almost turned around and walked out, but I was like, "You're here, just do it." So I play this very complicated Mozart piece and I get to like the very last measure and I've played it perfectly. And then boom, on the last measure, like I end on all the wrong chords. And I could just feel the audience just being so uncomfortable for me because first of all, I was 22 in a room full of elementary students. So I think of that as one of those moments that's one of my most embarrassing and also one that took a lot of courage. And the last thing I'll say is then I stopped playing piano and about last year I decided to get back to it and I'm back playing the piano,
I want to hear it.
never to do a recital again.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, that brings us to the end. So, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Energy Connection and Courage. We will see you back here next time. Thanks, everybody.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.